to Dummerston. It's made such a huge difference, I think, for lots and lots of people, including public officials, and how we deal with the bears that we live with. So this is really important to us. This is sponsored by the Dummerston Conservation Commission. We make every effort to inform people about the environment and the wildlife and the plant life that we live with. And we have a donation jar over here, so if you want to give something that helps us to continue to do these kinds of programs, that would be great. But we really want people to know what we're living with, and we, not just in Dummerston, but throughout the larger area. So welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and he can tell you who he is and a lot more about him.
I started working with black bears about 20 years ago and came at it from rather an unusual angle. I graduated from the University of New Hampshire in 1974 with a bachelor's degree in wildlife, and had hoped to go on to graduate school to do the kind of work I'm doing today. But unfortunately, I'm dyslexic, and my grade scores and my test scores were well below par, and I failed to get into graduate school. As a result, I went west to a trade school and learned the art of gunsmithing, and have employed myself as a custom gunsmith and gun designer over the last 30 years. I met my wife, Debbie, she'll wave her hand, selling books tonight, at Colt Firearms, where we both worked in the product engineering department. And in 1982, we returned to New Hampshire, and I still had it in my mind that I wanted to do the kind of work that I wanted to do. I had a leg up on this because my father, Lawrence Killam, who was a virologist at the Dartmouth Medical School, studied birds as an avocation and wrote the life histories of the woodpeckers of the eastern United States, as well as a book on crows and ravens. So I grew up in a household with lots of wild animals around. When I was 2, my dad went on sabbatical to Africa and brought a half-grown leopard into the house, much to my mother's chagrin. My younger sister, Phoebe, was 1 at the time, and she currently helps me with the bears. And my next oldest brother, Josh, was 4. He woke up one night with a leopard at the end of his bed screaming. But needless to say, we all survived. And we came back from Africa with 2 African hornbills and a Nile crocodile that my dad raised in a basement shower until it was about 6 feet long, and the National Zoo came and picked it up. When we came to New Hampshire in 1961, when I was 9, my dad had all kinds of native wildlife. He was licensed to keep whatever type of wildlife he wanted to for his research, and it was a time before formal wildlife rehabilitation, so the conservation officers brought injured and orphaned wildlife to him. So we had everything from woodchucks and fox and porcupines and beaver and hawks and owls and woodpeckers and aviaries and crows and ravens and just about everything you can imagine. And when my time came along, I was interested in studying carnivores. And carnivores present a bit of a problem to study compared to birds. My dad prided himself on simple apparatus, and he and my mother would sit in front of a woodpecker nest and document courtship and behavior. But to study carnivores, for those of you who have been in the woods, if you get a glimpse of them, they disappear so rapidly into the brush you don't get an opportunity to see them long enough to make any observations. But based on my childhood experience, I thought that if I could get a hold of an orphan animal and raise it loose in the forest, acting as a surrogate mother, I could document its juvenile behavior and use that to understand its adult behavior. Now, I wasn't thinking about black bears because at the time there was no rehabilitation of black bears in Vermont or New Hampshire. I was thinking more along the lines of a bobcat or a coyote or perhaps a fisher, the large woodland weasel we have around here. My sister Phoebe and I became licensed wildlife rehabilitators in hopes of me getting one of those animals. She was interested in caring for them. And at the end of 2 years, none of those animals came our way. But one day, a conservation officer pulled into the yard with an 11-month-old black bear cub that he thought had been hit by an automobile. He broke departmental policy, and we had our veterinarians check over the cub, and we determined that the cub had not been hit by an automobile. that it had no infectious disease, yet it was still wobbly. It shook and it was unable to climb or stay on a branch, and something was desperately wrong with it. I was determined to find out what it was, because if you simply euthanize an animal, there's not much opportunity to learn about things like this. But the animal was quickly confiscated from us, but later that spring I got a call from the director of Fish and Game in New Hampshire, and he asked me if I'd take that bear back. And I told him what I planned to do. I planned to keep it alive as long as possible, but when the time came, we'd euthanize it and try to determine its illness. And that time came, and we sent its brain out to the Wildlife Disease Lab in Wyoming and got a diagnosis of lysosomal storage disease, which is a congenital disease caused by inbreeding that has a human parallel of Tay-Sachs disease, which exists in certain populations where inbreeding occurs for religious reasons or otherwise. And this was the first documented case of lysosomal storage disease in black bears, and it's exceedingly rare in wild animal populations, but relatively common in domestic animals, because after all, that's how we get our domestic animals. And since that time, there have been 2 more cases in New Hampshire, 2 in Massachusetts, 1 in Maine, and more recently 1 out in Wyoming. And the likely cause of this illness is the fact that in the 1850s, our land use patterns were very different. 85% of New England was open agricultural land. The forests were reduced and fragmented, and on top of that, there was 125 years of bounties on black bears. So their populations were likely reduced to very small island populations where this type of inbreeding might have occurred. Later that spring, I got a call from Forrest Hammond, who's the Vermont black bear biologist currently. He was working on the Stratton Mountain Bear Project, and he had 2 orphan cubs that were the result of that project. And he'd heard about what I wanted to do and contacted me and asked me if I'd take the 2 cubs. And I said, well, there's a small issue of a permit. I said, but if you'll talk to New Hampshire Fish and Game and they're willing to give me a permit, I'll be happy to take the cubs. Well, the next morning I had a permit in hand, and since that time we've raised, rehabilitated, and returned to the wild over 105 black bear cubs. 2 years ago, we had an extraordinary year and ended up with over 30 black bear cubs. This was the result of 2011 being an extraordinary food year with beech nuts, apples, and berries, where all the female bears that could have cubs did have cubs, followed by 2012, which was a very poor food year. Those of you might remember we had 70 and 80 degree temperatures in March that caused early budding of many plants, so there was a failure of the apple crop and berry crops. And over half of these cubs came to us. They were the result of their mothers being shot at chicken coops or beehives that weren't protected with a simple electric fence with bait on it. And the bait, you smear smell on the wire, and bears check out all new smells with their tongues. And once they've been zapped on the tongue, they have very little interest in what's behind that fence. But it's been unfortunate that these females were shot. People panic when they see a bear at their chicken coop. But the reality is that it was just a mother bear searching for food for her cubs, and certainly not an animal that needed to be removed from the wild. And she certainly can raise her cubs a lot cheaper than we can, and probably a lot better than we can. So it's important to call Fish and Game, to put up an electric fence to prevent animals from getting into chicken coops and solve these kind of problems. Last year we had a single cub that came up from Massachusetts, and this year we already have 8 newborn cubs that came in beginning in about the 13th of February, the earliest that we've ever had them. They were the result of logging operations, a hunter shooting a mother bear, a rabbit hunter shooting a mother bear, and a sugar maker disrupting a den and wounding a mother bear. So they come from all situations that could be avoided if the public was educated. And the reality is that we work in bear dens all winter long. Mother bears are not aggressive at their dens. If your dog finds a den, grab your dog and go home. There's no danger in getting out of there. The bear's not going to come out and get you. If your dog goes in after the bear, it might not come out looking so good. But otherwise, the bears are certainly not aggressive at these dens. What I do is study bear behavior, and I do it in a little different manner than the standard scientific method. Being dyslexic, I've had to work out my own ways of doing things, and this all started about 20 some odd years ago. I was accepted as an adult student at the Thayer School of Engineering at Dartmouth, and they told me that they currently could work with dyslexic students, that I'd have to be tested and I could take advantage of some of the methods that they had for accommodating learning disabilities. Well, I was tested and I discovered that I had an IQ in the top 1%, and that was pretty amazing considering I considered myself stupid for 40 years. And I also learned that I read at a third grade level, and the woman who tested me looked at me and she said, "Boy, you're going to turn out interesting." And I said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "This is Dartmouth. Don't all the kids have IQs like that?" And she said, "No, none of them." And she said, your reading rate is far below the normal dyslexic kid or kid with learning disabilities at Dartmouth. Well, at the Thayer School, they put me into remedial calculus, physics, and computer programming, and quickly flunked me out of the course. But I understood the theory in each of those classes, even though I couldn't do the calculations. And I left there realizing that if I was that smart, why am I bothering trying to conform with society? Why don't I just do things my own way? And ever since that time, I've been successful. And so what I do is all my observations are firsthand that I make my analysis out of. I pay attention to detail naturally, so I see a lot more in my observations than most people do. I think in pictures, so I can store a lot more information without having to put words to them. So when I did my field notes, I would go out for long walks with the cubs up to 9 hours at a time, and everything that was interesting that happened, I paid attention to. And when I came home that evening, I'd write up my field notes, and I'd turn on a video in my head. I'd rewalk the walk, and I'd see all my observations in the same kind of detail as I saw them when I was out there observing them in the first place. And that was certainly a big advantage over going into the woods with a pad, a paper, or an iPad, and typing things down while you're trying to look at them at the same time. And I assemble my observations. I see everything as a system. So I assemble these observations. I realize that everything is interrelated and interconnected, and evolution works in a certain way. It doesn't design anything that's not supposed to be there. So everything has a purpose, and I can make pretty good sense out of them using this process. And the more observations I get, the stronger the models get, and pretty soon they get predictive, and I can test other people's observations and ideas as well. This is my representation of the social behavior of the black bear. You won't be able to read it because it's kind of fine print. But when I started doing this work, black bears were considered to be solitary animals. That is, the only interactions they had with their own kind was with their offspring and their mates during the mating season. And they knew they congregated at concentrated food sources like dumps or salmon rivers. But beyond that, they didn't know very much about them. And a truly social animal, which they were not considered to be, are animals like wolves or chimpanzees that have territories, and all their resources are within those territories. A family unit lives within the territory, and there's alpha animals that allocate the resources down through the hierarchies. But the closest thing that a black bear has to a territory is a female home range. Each female bear needs a high-quality home range of 3 to 5 square miles in order to raise her cubs, and that's because her cubs have short legs. They can't travel well. And the resources, there are no bear or group of bears are able to control all the resources that they need all the time. And the bears eat the highest quality foods in the forest, the berries, the nuts, and ants, bees, and grubs. And these foods are generally available in patches that are unevenly distributed on the landscape. They're also affected by the weather, so there's seasonal changes in them. The female home ranges, however, are evenly spaced on the landscape. They're cookie-cutter across the landscape. So at any given time, one female bear may have a huge surplus of food in her home range, and her immediate neighbor can have nothing. And this has led to a system of sharing over time that's led to what I believe is the type of social behavior that parallels early human behavior. These bears appear to be reciprocal altruists. They appear to have social exchange. They appear to let other female bears feed in one female bear's home range under the condition that when the tide is turned, that they'll have access to the surplus in that neighboring bear's home range. And that's what I'll be talking about tonight. The young cubs that I used in my study were the very young cubs that came to me before they had experience with their natural mothers outside the den. These were the bottle feeders. These were the cubs that would be habituated to me regardless of how I raised them. And I decided that they needed an education, and I could get an education by giving them one. And so I would take them on long walks in the forest up to 9 hours at a time and return them safely to the remote enclosures that we built to keep them safe during the night. I was able to observe their very first reactions to their natural environment. I could see their tongues coming out and sticking to an object, lifting scent off that object and bringing it back to a small bump behind their incisors. This bump was called the papilla, the vomeronasal organ. Bears, like your dogs and cats at home, have two olfactory systems. The vomeronasal system, which goes to the accessory olfactory lobe of the brain, and the nasal epithelium that goes to the olfactory lobe of the brain. The vomeronasal system identifies scent, and the nasal epithelium learns from the vomeronasal system and is later able to locate and identify scent. So this type of behavior in these cubs was very exaggerated. The tongues would come way out and stick to objects, but in an adult bear, the tongue still comes out, but it's so subtle that it's almost impossible to observe. And so it was a great advantage taking these cubs into the forest. I followed several of these bears into adulthood. One of them was a bear named Yoda, who lived until she was 5.5 years old and raised one set of cubs. But the main bear that I work with is this bear. Her name is Squirty. Squirty is now 17 or 18 years old and has her 9th set of cubs that she's raised in the wild with her. I saw her this evening, or this afternoon, for the first time this year, and she has triplets. I've written about Squirty in both of my books and all the films I've done with National Geographic and Discovery. Squirty's been instrumental in my work because there's no separation between Squirty and I. She treats me like a bear. And that's good in most respects, but not in all respects, because she treats me like a bear. Bears, I found out, because they're altruists, they need some judicial system, and they have punishment. And Squirty has rules, and I have to obey those rules, and if I don't obey the rules, I get bit. So I have to be careful around Squirty, but Squirty is a very gentle bear, except when I break the rules.
Are you going to tell us the rules?
I'll tell you what the rules are. And basically, her rules are she has a lot of rules, but when her cubs are very young, she doesn't want me close to the cubs. And when they get older, she doesn't care. But the biggest rule is when she's interacting with another bear, going after it to punish it, or whatever she's up to, she doesn't want me scaring that other bear off and interfering with her social activities. And that's where I can get in the most trouble. And that's because I'm trying to document things, and I'm often trying to film it with video, and all I have to do is break a stick, and the other bear bails and runs, and Squirty's not very happy.
Squirty comes after you then?
Yes.
Yeah.
But she'll not only will she occasionally bite me, but then she reconciles immediately. She goes into a soft, repetitive moan saying, I'm terribly sorry, but that was necessary. And there's a human parallel. If you think about our relationships with our loved ones, we have what we call moralistic aggression. So when the actions of our partner exceed our expectations, we tend to explode. And we do it sometimes in not very flattering ways. And we can do it because we can generally reconcile. But we generally don't treat strangers in the same way, because it's much harder to reconcile with strangers. I found that there was a matrilinear hierarchy. Squirty was here in the middle. And these were her, was her oldest daughter, SQ2, an adult granddaughter, SNLO, a younger daughter, Brooke, an adult granddaughter, 2, and the youngest subadult, SQ2LO, who was daughter of SQ2. Squirty on sight will chase all the bears below her in the hierarchy, and it's linear because SQ2 will chase all the bears below her, SNLO will chase all the bears below her, and everybody chases SQ2LO. And the result of this hierarchy is that in a marginal food year, Squirty will have access to the highest quality foods in the greater home range. And Squirty has not only established her own home range, but as she expanded it, she'd drop a daughter into that expanded area to hold it. And her daughters would do the same thing. So from about a 3 to 5 square mile area, now maybe a 20 or 25 square mile area with some overlap. And all the females are related in that area. And the second thing it does, it delays the opportunity for the young subadults who might want to stay in the greater home range. It delays their opportunity to give birth to cubs. She might not have a chance to give birth to cubs until she's 5 or 6 years old, whereas if there was an open home range, she'd be giving birth to her first cubs at 3 to 4 years old. The young males that came into the study area were quickly chased out. There wasn't much tolerance for subadult males. Squirty in this sequence is going after her grandson. I personally watched him get chased more than 30 times. He not only got chased by Squirty, but by his mother and by his aunts and any other bear that could lock a target on him. And finally, by September of his second year, he left the greater home range and joined the population of male bears in the upper valley. The large males that came into the study area came in during the mating season, and because of their size, they could take food from whoever they wanted to. The largest 10 to 15% of the males do all the mating. These are the 300-pound plus animals. But it wasn't long before the females didn't tolerate this kind of intrusion. And in this picture, Squirty, weighing about 165 pounds, is going after a 350-pound male and asking him to leave. I watched SQ2 when she weighed only 135 pounds, do a very stiff-legged walk, zigzagging in front of a big 350-pound male. He backed off and sat in the bushes and acted like it wasn't any big deal. But in the morning, he was gone, and he never returned. And this suggests that there's a degree of female choice in mating, because if there wasn't a repercussion, these big males would stay and compete with the females and their cubs in these female home ranges. The big surprise in this study was that there was a number of unrelated females that came to the clearing. And the clearing is my study area where I observe social interactions. It's on a piece of property that I own that's about a mile off the nearest town road. And it's distant from any human residence. I drive up there in the evening every day from the time the snow leaves in the spring until the snow returns in the fall. I provide a small food reward to any bear that shows up while I'm there. And some nights no bears show up, and some nights quite a few bears show up. But it's in the center of Squirty's home range. It's in a spot that she controls, and she determines who is able to come into that clearing and who is not. And as I've mentioned, all of her relatives who come in, she chases in that matrilinear hierarchy. But these unrelated females, who were all relatives of this bear named Moose, who was about 13 years Squirty's senior, these bears were able to come in and share Squirty's resources, and she showed no aggression towards them whatsoever. And this suggested that there was a value to these bears, that they were cooperators, and that some sort of reciprocity was taking place, that these bears had social contracts, as I mentioned before, that you're welcome to have my surplus as long as I can have your surplus when the tide is turned. Squirty controlled an oak ridge, and Moose and her clan controlled an area of 23,000 acres on the eastern side of my study area that was predominantly beach. So in oak years, Moose and her clan were in Squirty's home range, and in beach years, Squirty and some of her clan would go over to feed beach in Moose's home range. And this has been going on for many years. But literally, in 1 year, SQ2 came to the clearing, was there probably 60 nights and got chased 38 nights. Moose was there about 40 nights and got chased once. And that's how big a difference there was between the two. And you think about that, and that same kind of condition exists with humans. We certainly don't go up and berate strangers the same way we might a family member. And again, strangers are cooperators. They are part of a greater society. They are valuable to us, and we certainly don't want to alienate them. And we certainly have less of an opportunity to reconcile. I wondered what male bears, what kind of strategy they had. They're more difficult to study than female bears. And the reason is that if you put a telemetry collar on a male bear and he disappears over the mountain, you don't know what mountain he went over. Their home ranges can be as much as 200 square miles, so you might spend all summer long trying to find out where they went, riding around in an automobile or an airplane, and at the end of the summer you'd have very little information. But when trail cameras became affordable, I started monitoring the extra bears in my female home ranges using trail cameras, and I'd set them up generally in clear cuts where there was a surplus of berries and ants, bees, and grubs. I would put a small amount of corn, a gallon bag of corn, in front of each camera. I usually just use one camera, and I'd replace it as often as it was taken. And I knew that one large bear could eat 3 gallons of corn, so it was the amount of corn that one bear could easily eat. And at the end of 2 weeks, it wasn't unusual to film 8 or 10 different male bears. And it took me an awful lot of pictures before things started to make sense. I literally have taken over 100,000 pictures with trail cameras. But in 2008, I hit the perfect situation. It was a clear cut. It was in the last years of its productivity. It was about 16 years old. And I got my usual 8 or 10 different males that are in this picture. And in 2009, when I set my cameras up there, the only bear that was there was the resident females. The males had all moved on because there was no longer a surplus in the area. But the big surprise was in 2008, I had an awful lot of pictures of 2 male bears sharing that small amount of corn. And this suggested friendships and coalitions, and it suggested that the male bear's strategy to access surplus food in the female home ranges was to join a loose group of friends that could move in, overpower the female, and have access to those surplus foods. I'd already seen that if a single subadult came in, that he was quickly chased out, and he didn't have much opportunity to feed on his own. And this again parallels human behavior. As far as I know, this is the only case of unrelated male bears forming groups for any purpose other than humans. And I know they're unrelated because I've done the DNA of all the bears in my study area. We use hair snares and collect hair samples wherever we can. And we've had it tested at the UNH Genome Lab. And we found that the male bear population was genetically unrelated with each other. All this is about the access to food. And in the spring of the year, the bears are eating what I call emerging growth. They're eating the new growth on plants before the cells harden off and the nutrients are no longer available. The cubs in this picture are climbing a red oak tree and eating the oak leaf starts as the buds first break into leaves. They'll eat the swollen buds of beech this time of year when they emerge from the dens in early to mid-April. And then the beech leaf starts and the beech leaves as late as the middle of June. They'll be eating nodding sedge in the woodland trails. They'll eat the flowers of red maple and white ash. You'll see them the edge of agricultural fields this time of year, feeding on the succulent grass. And the important thing about the food in the springtime, even though it won't make the bears fat, it's generally universally available. So there's very little competition for food this time of year, and because of that, the bears pick the spring for their mating season. Female bears come into estrus from the last week of May until the first week of July, which coincides with the berry season. And the male and female bears spend 3 to 7 days together, and the result of that union is a two-celled organism called a blastocyst. They're delayed implanters. So that blastocyst doesn't implant into the uterus until late November, early December. And then there's a short gestation period of 50 to 55 days, and the cubs are born in the dead of winter in mid-January. They weigh less than a pound. Their eyes are shut. Their little ear flaps are down. They continue to develop outside the womb and are not even able to follow their mother or climb until she emerges from the den in early to mid-April. First thing the mother bear will do is build a nest at the bottom of a good climbing tree. She'll coach her cubs the very first time they go up a tree. They instinctively can climb, but they have to learn about rough bark, smooth bark, and the skinny end of a limb. She'll spend 3 or 4 weeks at that site before she moves on, before the cubs are adept at climbing and following, before she moves on to better feeding grounds. And when she does, she'll go from one large pine tree or hemlock, things that I call babysitting trees, where the cubs can be up in the limbs, practicing climbing and safe from predators. She'll radiate out from the base of the tree to feed. The cub's toenails are audible on the bark, so if anything scares the cubs, she can return in a hurry to see what's going on. She'll continue feeding in this fashion throughout the summer and fall, and the cubs will den with her as yearlings their first winter, and the family unit will break up the following June when the male bear shows up. A couple of years ago, I was fortunate to watch both the pre-courtship and courtship behavior of the black bear. Here's Squirty's daughter, SQ2, meeting a large male bear for the first time. She's very nervous about him because she's been with her cubs for 18 months, and he's kind of casual, and he's been Don Juaning around. You'll see him opening and closing his mouth. He's expelling moist air from his lungs, picking up her condition of estrus on the airwaves and drawing it back through his olfactory ability. And you see the size difference between the male and the female in these shots. He finally, oops, I'll let you hear that again with louder. Finally, they get their signals straight, and he grasps her with his forepaws and bites her behind the neck. All this aggression and the bite behind the neck are important because it stimulates the female to produce an egg precisely at the time of mating, which ensures that conception will take place. This first coupling only lasted a few minutes, and then they went around the clearing with open mouth wrestling, which there's a bunch of good pictures in the book of this type of behavior. And about another 25 minutes of that behavior, and then he got a hold of her a second time, and this time they locked up, and literally locked up. The male bear has a penis bone or baculum that's like a dog's that's hooked and locks over the female pelvis. They were locked up for about 45 minutes, laying in the brush. There was another female bear at the clearing at the time who came walking by about 10 feet away, rubbernecking as to what was going on. And finally, they unhooked and disappeared into the forest. 85% of the black bear's diet is vegetative matter, and the balance of their diet is animal protein. And of that animal protein, 90 to 95% is ants, bees, and grubs. Having said that, bears are not true predators. They are opportunists, though, and they'll take a deer fawn in the first week of life, or a moose calf if they can find it in the first week of life. They'll take a bird's nest or a fledgling bird off a branch, again if they find it, and occasionally they'll take domestic livestock, generally of the same species that they would encounter in the wild, either ungulates or fowl. And the domestic livestock is obviously a lot slower moving, and there's a lot of smells that attract bears to livestock areas, like the smell of grain and manure. I used to tell audiences that bears ate ants maybe 10 or 15 times a day, but I was out with Squirty one afternoon, and she'd run her nose along a log and smell a colony of ants and bite into the log and lick up whatever larvae and ants got in the way. She was finding and cleaning out colonies of ants at the rate of 40 to 60 an hour. She was highly adept at this. I was with Yoda along the Mascoma River one dry fall when there was an abundance of ground nesting hornets in the forest, yellow jackets, and Yoda was finding and cleaning out yellow jacket nests at the rate of 12 to 16 an hour. She was smelling them from about 35 yards off, and then she'd hone in on the nest and bite into the nest, and about 150 hornets would whack her in the face. She'd shake them off, and brush them off her muzzle with her paw, and then go right in and eat whatever larvae and hornets that got in the way. She'd walk away casually with a swarm of hornets over her head, like Pigpen in the Peanuts cartoon. And meantime, her cubs would hit the deck and cover up their head and ears because they didn't tolerate the stings anywhere near as well. Summer vegetative foods of the black bear grow in moist, rich soils along rivers and streams and the bottoms of hills where you might find red maple and white ash growing. They're succulent species, jewelweed that grows in everybody's yard in the spring. There are 3 species of wild lettuce, and the most important is jack-in-the-pulpit. And jack-in-the-pulpit is the most important because it's their major root crop. The bears eat the root or the corm from the size of a dime to the size of a baseball. And in years when the nut crop fails, they'll rely heavily on the jack-in-the-pulpit corms to get them through. Jack-in-the-pulpit corms are more nutritious than either beech nuts or acorns. It's the summer habitat of the black bear that brings people and bears close together because, after all, we settled in the valleys for those same rich soils. It's not unusual in New England. Boy, those lights are busy tonight. It's not unusual in New England for somebody to have a nicely mowed lawn that leads up to an old orchard that might have 3 feet of vegetation. A black bear could be happily out there feeding on jack-in-the-pulpit, and you never know that it was out there unless you went out and saw the stumpled trails and the occasional divot where the bear dug the jack-in-the-pulpit root. You never know it was out there unless the bear stuck its nose up in the air and smelled black oil sunflower seed. Black oil sunflower seed has 3 times the calories per unit of any of their natural foods. In the springtime, it can be quite a temptation. Bears prioritize their foods by the quality of food, the quantity of food, and the amount of risk that it takes to get the food. In my experience, black oil sunflower seed is served up between 5 and 35 pounds at a time. So a bear can come into your yard and get a day's pay in about 15 minutes. The average black bear needs to put on 30% of its body weight in fat to survive 6 months of hibernation. A female black bear that's going to give birth to cubs needs to put on 50% of her body weight in fat to survive hibernation, to nurse her cubs through the winter, and have some reserves for nursing your cubs this time of year. So if you want to understand why a bear acts the way it does around food, just think about how we act around money. After all, we store our money in the bank for a rainy day, for our retirement, to put our kids through school, or to buy a fancy toy. And you wouldn't go home tonight and leave $20 bills all over your lawn and expect that nobody would come pick them up. And that's the same thing as leaving food attractants around the yard and being surprised when the bear shows up to get a snack and crunches a bird feeder or gets into a chicken coop. The natural foods that the bears use to reproduce in New Hampshire and Vermont are red oak acorns and beech nuts. Red oak is primarily in the central and southern parts of the state and up the Connecticut River Valley. Beech is in the remainder of the state. Bears use a number of different types of dens in both states. In this picture, I'm crawling out of an excavated den that was dug by Yoda, that she used both as a maternal den and as a den with her yearlings. It was excavated under an old root mass of a tree that had gone over many years ago, and there's a live yellow birch growing out of the top of it. When I crawled into the den and looked up, the ceiling of the den was a matrix of live roots that prevented the soils from collapsing down around her and her cubs during the wintertime. This bear chose a different strategy. This is what we call an open ground nest. This is unusual because it was in a hardwood clear cut. These are generally in dense softwood regeneration, so dense you could walk by a bear's den from 10 feet away and you'd never know it was there. They typically have structure behind them, either a down log or a tree, and sometimes these ground nests can be just like a 3-foot robin's nest, perfectly molded and shaped in the center, just like a big sphere. This bear chose the winter sun to give birth, to take care of her cubs. They also use rock dens, and these are the rocks that have fallen below the ledges. These make our winter den work difficult. I have a cooperative project with New Hampshire Fish and Game where we keep GPS collars on 10 female bears. They're interested in the number of cubs born and the number of cubs that survive as yearlings for their population models. I'm interested in behavior. These rock dens, a bear can get into a hole that's not much bigger than its head. They're very supple. They can wiggle down into these holes and get down out of our reach. Even if we could sedate them, we sometimes can't get them out. We thought about designing the perfect UNH student that was skinny and strong and had flexible tissue that we could lower down by his bootstraps and pull these bears out, but so far that hasn't worked very well. Here's a yearling bear with its mother in the rock den, and the last type of den we see are tree dens. These are in overgrown trees. When they get to be about 3 feet in diameter, the center of the tree can rot, decay, and drop out, leaving a huge cavity in the tree. These are preferred by bears, but there aren't very many of these trees around due to a logging economy. They're generally boundary line trees or trees in boulder fields. And this tree was outside of a new residential area in Lyme, and one morning in April I got a call from a woman. She said there was a bear in her tree, and I got there and sure enough there was a bear in her tree. And I informed her that the bear had been in her tree all winter long. With this complex social behavior, you'd expect it to have complex communication, and they do. In this picture, Squirty is opening and closing her mouth, detecting scent on the airwaves. She's expelling moist air from her lungs, picking up the scent and drawing it back through her olfactory abilities. And one of the things I discovered about the bear was that they have an organ that's associated with the vomeronasal system that allows them to read aromatic compounds as well as large molecules that were generally described for the vomeronasal system. And this organ lays in the vomer, which is a V-shaped bone that lays below the nasal septum. There's a pocket in it. It has a sensory nerve that goes down through the roof of down to the roof of the mouth, and then 8 sensory nerves that go up the vomer and spread out across the roof of the throat, so that any incoming scent they can read with the vomeronasal system. I discovered it because all the cubs that I raised, all the new vegetation that they came across, they would hold in their mouth for a few seconds and released undamaged. And I was wondering what they were doing, because they weren't chewing it or there was no other sign of damage. So I learned all the different types of plants that were going into the cub's mouth and kept track of what ultimately happened to them. And I found that the cubs had identified 125 different food items over the first summer and rejected many, many more. I tried to put leaves in my dog's mouth, and they weren't very impressed. And I put the leaves in my own mouth, and no bells and whistles went off. And this lens, let me get some milk. Water. This lends credence to the Native Americans who said that they observed the black bear to find out what plants could be used for foods and pharmaceuticals. And it makes sense because a lot of the plants that are out there are drop-dead deadly, and you wouldn't be sampling plants very long before you decided it was a bad idea. But the bears can simply hold a plant in their mouth for a few seconds and determine whether it's edible or not. Bears have emotional expression, which is honest. Emotional expression is common in most animals. As humans, we have more emotional expressions in our faces than any other mammal. We have over 3,000 muscles in our face devoted to expression. We wouldn't be able to meet in a group like this if we weren't comfortable with the emotional state of everybody else in the room. And we get that from facial expression. Right now, everybody in this room has a passive look on their face, something I call subway face. You go anywhere in the world and look at the expression of the people on the subway, it'll be that passive look. They're not giving up anything. But if somebody was up to something in this room, it would also be written all over his face. It's a year anniversary of the Boston bombing, and they caught the bombers by looking at video and looking for expressions of people that didn't match the rest of the people in the videos. And they caught these two guys casually walking away like nothing happened, whereas everybody else was horrified. So it's a very honest reflection of what's going on. And Squirty, in this picture, has just put one of her cubs up a tree at weaning time. She has ear expression. Her ears are like a horse. When they're pinned back, they're aggravated and communicate in all levels in between. She has eye expression, eyebrow expression, general facial expression. And so you can see that she's aggravated in this picture, and here she is with a happy face. I get a lot of stories about people and their experiences with bears, and I often ask them what the bear looked like, and the answer I always get is black. Now, bears also communicate with intention, and this is where they differ from most other animals. Scientists believe that most non-human animals communicate primarily with emotion, that they cry out and others hear them. But as humans, our language is an emotional utterance with the mechanical manipulation of our lips, teeth, tongue, and larynx. So we can lie with our words, but if you want to tell if we're lying or not, you read our facial expression and our body language to determine if we're telling the truth. And That mixture, I believe, was important because humans dealt with strangers on a regular basis, and that was much more complex than dealing with just family members. If you're only dealing with family members, you can use emotion. You can grunt and groan around your house, and everybody knows what's going on and how you feel. But when you go out in the real world and deal with strangers, you got to get it right because there's consequences. So bears have an expression of intention, and now they generate sounds and actions mechanically. So now they may chomp their teeth, they may huff, swat, or false charge, or make that guttural sound the bears are making in the video, a ho. And the meaning of these sounds and actions is based on the context of the situation at the time. So it's greatly, even though they have a limited number of ways of communicating, it's greatly broadened by context. So if you're out walking on a trail one day and you ran across a female bear with cubs, she was out walking on a trail that day too, and before she encountered you, her cubs are already up a tree, she false charges you. And that means she rushes at you and swats the ground and expels a big blast of air. Your bodily fluids start to run. But all she's trying to do is delay confrontation long enough for communication to take place. But she's doing it in a bear's language. Now, if you're working at a restaurant and you're carrying a pail of food scraps out to the dumpster and a bear false charges you, all he wants you to do is dump the pail of food scraps before you put it in the dumpster so he can get a meal without having to fight the steel box. I was with Squirty one afternoon. We were on Lambert Ridge and Lime. It was a beautiful sunny day, and this thunderhead came rumbling up the valley. Squirty false charged the thunderhead. Believe it or not, the thunderhead turned and left, and the sun came back.
What should a person do when they do that? You know, do the false charge where you just stand still?
Well, there's a big section in the back of the book, and I'll answer it now just out of convenience, but hold your ground, keep your eyes on the bear, and talk softly to it. And you always want to be strong in a situation like that, and your eyes are your strength. It doesn't matter if you're having an encounter with a dog or another person, that's good advice. And the bear can read our emotional expression. So she may false charge you, she may circle you, and if she's circling you, she just wants to know who you are. She wants to smell your back trail. And if you continue talking softly, which is an appeasement message, she'll determine that you're not a threat, and within 10 to 15 minutes, she'll care less about what you do, and you can walk off safely without a problem. But I'm going to show you now what a false charge can look like. This is Squirty false charging. And this situation was that's just to desensitize you a little bit if it ever happens to you. But this took place, I filmed this with a handheld camera, and you notice it didn't jump very much, but it was the last film that National Geographic filmed, and Squirty was tired of having them around. They were strangers and intruding on her time, and she was simply asking us to pack our bags and go home. And it was a very deliberate act, and it got the message across. I'm going to play it again in slow motion, and this time watch her face, watch her ears, and you'll see that she's relaxed, her eyes are comfortable, she's alert to what's going on with her ears, she's making her mind up, and slowly her ears start to tell us something. They're beginning to go back, then her face will lengthen out, and she'll get a harsh look on her face. She'll chomp a couple of times, and then she'll go back into the relaxed state. And this is a very deliberate act. It can be used to bluff or deceive, and again, I believe it's necessary for any animal that deals with strangers to have that ability to bluff.
What did you do next?
Well, we went home, but...
You guys went backwards?
No, Squirty wasn't going to do anything to me. It was directed at the film crew. No, I just stood up and told them that, filming was done for the day, and that was her message, and it was time to go home. And they never liked that because, they were there, they wanted to shoot all day long, and Squirty would give them about 45 minutes before she said, all right, that's enough of my time. And that was the end of things. Yes?
You were asking us to pay attention to the ears, and it seems at the end that her ears are then up front and she's turned her head.
Their ears are back more alert, but she's still showing a little aggravation, but she went back into a relaxed state.
My question is what is the difference between a false charge and an actual charge? So,
Actual charges just don't happen, and they don't happen with any of these pre-signs. A bear that's actually charging you or that's predacious will stalk you like a mountain lion. They will give no signals. Its idea is to catch you. So, it'll come from behind, it'll come quietly, and you won't see any chomping, you won't see any of the kind of signs that may scare you, but they're all good signs. I go into this in some detail in the appendix of my book. Bears, because they are altruists, they have to have a judicial system. Their judicial system is far superior to our own. We think because we have DNA and fingerprinting that we got pretty hot stuff, but we have to get the DNA or the fingerprints off the perpetrator. We have to find it at the crime scene, then we got to find the perpetrator. Sometimes we don't have his DNA or fingerprints, and it's a long and complicated process. If one bear breaks another bear's rules, it knows who did it and can track them down and exact punishment anytime they wish. A bear, wherever it travels, deposits a little bit of scent on anything that its fur touches that will last up to 48 hours. So there's a transparency about wherever they go. They follow each other to find food, and they follow each other to punish. They share food unless it's otherwise defended. So bears, this kind of method in bears would be like each one of us having a GPS tracker on us, and the NSA would be up there keeping track of each and every one of us as to what we're doing, and have that ability to track us down. Bears can do that. As an example, I went up to the clearing one night, and Squirty's adult daughter, 2, was there, and she came and cleaned up her small food reward and went up and took a nap. That small subadult female, SQ2LO, came in and cleaned up the residuals. And SQ2LO, like other subadult females, had the habit of pushing the boundaries of the adult bears just to find out what those boundaries were. And she went off into the woods. 2 woke up, came down and saw that her residuals were gone, smelled who took them, and tracked her step by step into the forest and exacted punishment. Now, typically with bears, even though they'd like to bite, biting rarely takes place because they end up chasing each other. And the subordinate bears are lighter, faster, and can get further out on the limb. So it's rare that an adult bear can actually catch a subordinate bear. Oops. Well, you're going to get false charged again, I guess. You guys will really be ready for it. Bears also are deliberate markers, and when they mark on purpose, they're using sebaceous oil in their fur. This sebaceous oil is made up of large molecules of long-lasting scent that doesn't smell very much. And this bear, you might argue, isn't marking on purpose as she lets the sapling slide up across her back. But this is a different bear, the same sapling, And she's got it, pulling it over her back like this, making sure she gets every bit of sebaceous oil on that sapling as possible. Now, the meaning of these marks is also based on context. So we can go through the woods and find bear sign, but it's not very likely we'll know the reason why they mark without actually seeing them. The bears know what's going on, and they communicate readily in this fashion. Here's SQ2 following her mate during the mating season. She's detecting all the places that his scent touched the environment, and she's marking over his scent, letting him know that she's interested in finding it. She's back rubbing and using her tongue to pick up scent. She's huffing and drawing the scent back up in her nose. Now she's checking everywhere his feet touch the ground. She'll be doing a stiff-legged walk, which leaves a symbolic message of disturbed soil on the ground. She'll be dropping little drops of urine that through specialized hair that mark her presence. And finally, she's walking over saplings, letting them drag on her underbelly, and then they flip up like an olfactory antenna. So these bears are very, very busy markers. And the most important reason bears mark during the year is to find their mates during the mating season. The female bears may know who they want to mate with, but they've been with their cubs for 18 months, and now they've got to find the guy they were looking for. He'll back rub on these red pine trees. He'll flex his knees and rub that sebaceous oil into the forest bark of the tree. When he gets done, he'll rotate his head and bite the tree. And that's this fresh bite up here. These are historical bites. That releases the aromatic compounds of the sap of the tree, which waffle off and attract other bears to his mark. The female bear will come along, find the bear she's interested in. She'll rub on the tree and wait nearby. When he comes back, they'll get out of dodge. The male bear will have an entourage of subadult males that follow him around, mentoring off him during the mating season. It's not by his choice, but they're there. So wherever the female goes, the male bear will follow, and wherever she stops to feed, he'll set up a 2-acre territory around her, where he'll back rub on multiple trees and do that stiff-legged walk, leaving a warning track around her saying that she's taken. Here's a 350-pound male back rubbing on a tree, traveling with a female. More recently, I've been working with a different kind of bear. Starting in 2008, I've been consulting with the Chinese about reintroducing captively bred pandas into the wild. I traveled in 2008, again in 2012. 2012, a delegation from the Chengdu Panda Base came to our place in Lyme and stayed with us for an extended weekend. They walked with cubs loose in the forest. The cubs went and paid attention only to wild things, not anybody on the walk. They finally came to a bear tree and sniffed wild bear scent, and then they came off the tree and did a stiff-legged walk, marking with urine. Hu Rong, who's the director of science and research at the Chengdu Panda Base, exclaimed that they're communicating with wild bears without even meeting them, and she got very excited about that. They were worried about wild bears attacking researchers, and we went up to see Squirty at my study area, and Squirty and a couple of other females were there that night, and nobody attacked the truck. They left to go back to Drexel, and Drexel happens to be where I'm currently a PhD candidate. I'm in the process of writing my thesis, and the professor there, Jim Spatilla, is the guy that I'm working with in China with the pandas. So the project was back there. I just returned a couple of weeks ago from 2 weeks in China, and we started the project. It'll probably take 2 to 4 years before we are successful at doing anything. But it's very difficult working with the Chinese. Their culture is very different, and it takes an awful lot of meetings to do with the kind of things that I would do immediately in raising black bears. So, but it's moving forward, and we're working with 4 different cubs that are on track to go back out. To end up tonight, I have a quick visual. I call it Houdini's apple tree gymnastics, so hang on. Finally is dismount. Thank you very much. Anybody has questions, I'd be happy to take them. Yes.
Well, I'm asking with my daughter 2 questions. One, she was, in the earlier part of your presentation, she was curious about the fact that the male snout seemed to be longer than the female, and she was just wondering if that's generally the case, or was it just from the video? And along the same lines, you mentioned that, I guess it was Squirty had, maybe I'm wrong, but up to 9 litters of cubs. Is that generally how many times there will be groups of cubs, or what was the general or average?
Generally, a female bear will have cubs every 2 years. And so, and however long they can live up to 40 years. Most of them don't. They're a managed population where 20% of the population is generally killed either by automobiles or by hunters every year. The male bears do look like male bears. They look different. They might not be the snout, but they have broader muscles on their head, and they're bigger bodied and longer bodied. Female bears rarely exceed 60 inches from tip of nose to tip of tail. Male bears can go up to 80 inches from tip of nose to tip of tail. So they're long-bodied, muscular animals. Yes?
What's the title of your thesis?
Title of my thesis? It's going to be probably The Social Black Bear. I haven't written the title yet, but it's going to be on matrilinear hierarchy, reciprocal altruism in bears and communication. So basically what I've been talking about in the lecture and what I wrote about in my book. But it's done in scientific. Yes?
How did Squirty get her name?
How did Squirty get her name? These cubs all get their names when they come to us, and they're very small. Squirty was 3 pounds and 7 weeks old when she came to us. She had a sister, and she and her sister looked just about alike. Squirty was a little smaller, so she was the Squirt. Her sister had curly hair on her forehead, so she was Curls. And the male was the Boy. Simple enough. Sometimes we use the name of the town that they came from, or some other name that we might just happen to think up. But naming 105 cubs is not an easy task. Yes?
You were talking about the matrilineal structure, and it sounded like Squirty's daughters and her daughters were contiguous. Is that pretty much the structure, so that she sets up a home range and then those females stay in contiguous tracks around her?
Yeah,
her range then
becomes a greater home range.
bigger and bigger?
Right.
And then the males sort of go off.
The males disperse.
Wander.
Yeah, they don't stay nearby. So.
So what was it like? Squirty's home range, adding in her daughters and granddaughters. What was then her tract? What did you determine?
Well, it could be probably 20 plus square miles, and there's overlap. So between the female home ranges. Yes.
Well, I have one comment that I want to repeat that Ben said that bears don't home charge, they false charge. So I mean, it seems so scary to people, but that's not what you're going to experience in the woods. But the other is just, can you explain what you're now recommending for bird feeders and protection?
Bird feeders and protection? Well, bring them in.
Yeah.
And if you have to have them out, use electric fences around them. And bears are still going to come if you have electric fences, but they won't like getting zapped. But there's no real need to have them out from April 1st until Thanksgiving. And it's the same time every year, those recommended times. Although we have a listserv in Lyme, and it seems to be a major issue every year. People can't seem to remember April 1st and Thanksgiving. But it's a recurring question. Yes?
You said that you get reprimanded by Squirty when you get too close to the cubs.
Only when her cubs are small.
How close is too close?
Well, when her cubs are small, if I walked directly towards her and got as close as you and I are, she'd false charge me. And she knows me, but walking towards her is aggressive. And that's body language. If I walk towards you like this, I'm being very aggressive. And that's one of the ways bears communicate dominance. That's one of the ways you can get bears to leave your yard. And I talk about that in the book as well. Yes?
How much do human structures like superhighways and so forth interfere with the home ranges?
Well, they can be a problem. Generally, female bears don't like to cross traveled highways. And it can be a relatively, a state road can define boundaries of female home ranges. Male bears will cross during the mating season. Subadults will cross, and they get killed crossing major highways. So a fair number of bears get in bear automobile collisions. Yes?
You had quite a different scent than the bears did. And you met a lot of bears. How did they know that you were okay? Did they communicate that? Or if I'm with you, then she can be with you too? Or?
Well, they don't trust people all that much.
I wouldn't either.
They trust me, and when I go up to the clearing where I study them the same time all the time, it's in the center of Squirty's home range, and even there's bears that come in that I've never seen before, but they see me with Squirty, and they pick up on the fact that I'm okay. It's very rare that one of those strange bears will be skittish of me. But if there were a stranger there, I've had friends of mine come up on a four-wheeler, and the bears are all gone.
And did you ever smell different? Bacon or, what you ate?
What's that?
Well, did you smell different from day to day? What you ate or what you wore? Or?
Well, I still smell like myself.
Right.
I had one male bear that I raised that we put a collar on, and he left the area, dispersed, but I was still getting calls on him because he had a collar on. And he was about 45 miles from the house, and I went down to just talk to people, see if anybody had seen him. And I stopped to talk to a guy building the house, and next thing I know, it was Houdini. He was in the apple tree. He came running out and he came to see me. And he smelled my scent. He wasn't coming running out to anybody else. And so their nose is that good. Yes.
Do the collars interfere at all in the socialization between the groups themselves?
No, the collars don't seem to affect anything. I still change collars on Squirty without sedating her. I have to bribe her. I have to use Oreo cookies, but she'll still stick her neck out and let me bolt the collar on and take the collar off. And if it were that much of an inconvenience, she wouldn't let me do that. So, but anytime you've got a collar on anything, there's potential for problems. So sometimes when the bears get too fat, they'll get infections underneath the collars and things like that. Yes.
When film crew filmed Squid and she became aggressive, and you said that's enough. That means Squid knew she was filmed.
The question was, did Squirty know she was being filmed?
Yeah.
She knew there were strangers there, and she knows what a camera is. Let's put it that way. Because she doesn't like it when I pull a camera, when I pull a film camera out, because I'm sticking my nose into her business. And you got to realize that the time I spend with the bears, I'm taking their time. And that's one of the reasons that I give them food at the clearing, is to pay for that time. I can't get it for free. If I try to put a collar on Squirty without a bribe, she wrinkles her nose and puts her paw up like this. And says, "You're not putting a collar on." I give her the bribe, she sticks her neck out. So there's a lot of ways that they're like us.
Is there anything that draws a bear out of its den during the winter, particularly if it's a very mild winter?
If it's a very mild winter, and especially if a bear is not, maybe hasn't put enough fat on, or it knows where a few bird feeders are, he may den up close to the bird feeders and come out during the winter time and take a snack. That's not unusual. Real mild winters, when there's availability of acorns, the male bears will stay out and feed as long as they can get food. Yes?
When you get punished by a bite, what is it, a little nip, or is it?
Well, the punishment is commensurate with the crime, and I've learned not to recommit crime. But I have had puncture wounds, and when they're usually in the lower leg or the forearm, and they'll grab on, and then it's a delayed kind of thing.
Oh, they'll grab you in the...
Yeah. So it's not a vicious attack or anything like that, but it's clearly, and they don't do it without reason, and I always know what the reason is. So it's up to me to learn. Our rules work the same way. We grow up, being told by our parents what we can and can't do, but when we're growing up, we go break all those rules just to find out, where the boundaries are. And the same thing happens with bears. Yes?
With this long, cold winter, have you seen any damage to the bears or any residual from such a long, very cold winter?
Yeah, it's been difficult for them this spring. I had a couple of we put collars on some of the rehab bears that we released last year, and they were getting pretty thin. And the longer the winter carries on, the more weight they're losing. But they all survive. But it's trying on them when it's as long as it's been. And they're waiting for things to green up to get a good meal. Fortunately, there were some leftover acorns and leftover beech nuts, so they had some good food. Yes?
Do you have a handle of the numbers of bears in the wild surviving their first year alone versus your rehab bears surviving their first year alone?
Well, I suspect it's probably pretty close to the same. The bears in the wild have a disadvantage in poor food years. The yearlings will go out quite small, and they can have difficulties competing for food and even getting enough food the following year. Our cubs go out pretty large, but then they have to find enough food to support that body weight. Of the 30 cubs that we released 2 years ago, and they were released at 5 different release sites, 4 were known to be killed during the hunting season, which is not bad out of 30. One of the females released in central Vermont traveled all the way to Quebec, so they disperse long distances.
That's a female.
Yeah. Take a couple more questions. Yes.
In regard to beekeeping, if a electric fence is put around that and a bear comes and touches it, will it learn not to come back, or will it? I know the fence needs to continue to be baited over and over. Will that one bear come back, or say?
Generally speaking, once a bear has been zapped on his tongue, he won't come back and try. But if you forget to turn on the fence, that's usually what happens when there's a failure. It's a person has let up fly. Yeah.
How are the ticks affecting the bears?
What's that?
The tick population, are they affecting the bears much?
Tick. Oh, tick. The American dog tick and the deer tick are a nuisance to bears. They may well get Lyme disease. I haven't read very much about that. But it's not like the moose tick. that it's actually killing animals. The moose tick is a white-tailed deer tick, and the moose evolved where there wasn't any ticks, so they don't groom them off, and the populations go real high on them. This time of year, in April, they start to die. A lot of moose died of tick. Our moose populations in Vermont and New Hampshire are pretty much in jeopardy because of it. One more question. One more right here.
About bears, some are dangerous, some are not dangerous. Because when you feed a bear, or when they come up to you, some bears do really talk to you.
Well, you know, like some bears are dangerous and some aren't. Well, you've got to pay attention to any and every bear as an individual. You don't make any judgments, just like people. Some people are dangerous and others aren't. And bears are the same way. But you treat a bear right, and you're not going to have a problem. Thank you.